the nuclear family. These are different scaling of the family relationship. But in African fractals, you find that you can take this painting by another Trinidadian artist, whom I'm going to talk to you about more briefly. You find that the patterns in the whole painting recur, and you can take a fraction of the painting and see the whole painting at smaller scales. That is part of what is known as fractal elements. Self-similarity, this is another painting or drawing by a Sudanese painter, again using the principles of fractal, El-Salahi. Self-similarity suggests to us that the parts are not identical with each other. African Americans are not identical with each other, but they have a family resemblance that makes us to say that they are all people of African descent. Similarly, all human beings are not identical, but there is something similar among all human beings that make us children of one God. And you can go to a music like jazz, that all jazz records are not identical, all classical music records are not identical, but they are self-similar enough for us to classify them as belonging to the same genre. So that is the principle of self-similarity. Infinity tells us that these scaling, recursion, and self-similarity go on to infinity. You cannot exhaust the possibilities. Keeps on going and going and going to infinity. And fractional dimensions, again, suggest to us that what we look at as, for example, the human population is not a whole. It's not a whole, one whole number, but it's made up of fractions that are added up to make up human population, or the US population, the population of African Americans, African population. It's not one whole number. It is made up of fractions, fractional dimensions. You see it also in music. The notes that make up a musical score are not one single note, otherwise it would be boring. You have fractional dimensions in music. But I put it all together by adding a sixth principle, and maybe because I'm not familiar with fractals, this sixth principle is already contained in some of the elements that I've talked about. But I haven't seen it clearly, so I'm adding the principle of interconnectivity, that the fractals are not isolated fractions, but are interconnected, that the whole human population across the world is not made up of separate, isolated individuals, but made up of people who are interconnected with one another through social relations. Same with paintings, same with music, same with movies, and almost anything you can think about. The person who developed this interest is, okay, I'm not locked up. Okay, but if you check out Ron Eglash, you can check him out online, and you can watch this TED Talk video that he has. It's 16 minutes long, and he can explain fractals to you better than I can. Because he was an systems engineer in America who did his PhD in the history of ideas, got a Fulbright scholarship, fellowship to go to Africa and look at area photographs of African villages. And he was amazed that from country to country, region to region, all across Africa, they designed their cities in fractal patterns rather than in the straight grids that you have in New York City, or Washington, D.C., or LA. So why is it that Africans tend to prefer to design their environment in fractal patterns rather than in Cartesian patterns? Cartesian comes from René Descartes, who insisted that in order to maximize resources and the management of public affairs, you need to keep things straight and neat and tidy, so that if you have a fire in one block of New York, all you need to do is block here, and you contain the fire and put it out. It saves life, it saves time. Similarly, if you have a riot going on in one block of DC, the police can lock it down and contain it. But in Africa, they don't design their environment in such a way to make it easier for people in authority to control them. They design their environment in such a way that if somebody is going to try to capture Africans, he's going to have a hard time doing it because Africans will have many ways of escaping because the streets are not straight. They go all over the map in Africa. Can you imagine why? Eglash doesn't tell us why, but I suggest to you that the reason why Africans prefer to design their environment in fractal patterns is because no other group has been subjected to the type of intense predation that people of African descent face for as long as people of African descent face. It's intense because the Arabs raided Africa to enslave Africans for 500 years before the transatlantic slave trade began. So before the transatlantic slave trade, there was a trans-Saharan slave trade that went on for 500 years. And then the transatlantic slavery took another 400 years. That's a long time to be hunting any group of human beings and capturing them. And if you hunted the bald eagle as intensely as Africans were hunted, the bald eagle will learn not to build their nests in places where you can reach them easily. They will go up higher and higher to try to survive. It's a basic human instinct. So I believe that Africans are consciously applying fractal elements in all their designs as part of their survival strategy. Eglash says, just like my mom told me, that when he asked Africans why they do it, they say it is because it's beautiful. But you know, beauty is a survival strategy. That is why most of us are clean-shaven today. We put on some cologne and went to the salon, and we put on some nice church dress today to come out. Because human society tends to disrespect people who are said not to be beautiful. Okay? And that brings me to the quotation that you saw at the beginning, which is part of this exhibition, that art is not just art. It is a spirit that knows beauty, according to W.B. Du Bois. And when Francois used it, I was like, where did you get that? Because that's my language. That is Igbo language that you are writing in. In Igbo language, to be beautiful means to know beauty, literally. You don't know any other way to say you are beautiful, except to say that you know beauty. And then Francois reminded me that he took that from an adaptation of a short story by Du Bois that I actually adapted into a play, but forgot that such a powerful statement was lying in there, hidden in the fractal of the whole storyline. Okay, let's continue. What you have on top there is a Fulani wedding blanket. And you can see the fractal patterns, the recursion of the patterns, the scaling, the self-similarity, the fractional dimensions, but also the interconnectivity. The patterns are interconnected, and you can see in the cornrow that young people wear a lot. Different patterns of the cornrow. They exhibit these principles of the fractals. Whereas Africans think and build their environment in fractal dimensions, you find that Europeans prefer to make a distinction between the analog and the digital. They say that things that are analog are like raw, uncooked meat. Whereas the digital is something that is designed by human intelligence to add value to what nature already provided. So that the digital is actually superior to the analog. Precisely because you can control digital music. For example, you can tell the computer to give me 5 beats of